No? Hey there, I'm John Davis, one of the co-owners of the Bunker Studio here in Brooklyn and bass player for NAMM. Well, like getting into making electronic sounds on bass was kind of happened by sort of out of necessity. I was really into electronic music in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I was like making tracks at home and programming drum machines and synths. And then at the same time, I was playing a lot of bass and playing a lot of jazz and improvised music. And then the opportunity came up to play with JoJo in Nerve, and that was kind of when I had to put the two things together. It was like, okay, I know dance music, I know synths, I know how to play bass and improvise, but until that point I had never really put the two things together. So then it was like, okay, now I gotta figure out how I can take this instrument and create the kind of sounds that I would create with a synth and outboard gear. So it's really reverse engineering what I do in a production situation using pedals and using my bass. Not approaching it so much the way a guitar player or someone who's coming just from like a bass with effects perspective might end up at a very different route. I'm not as concerned with it sounding like bass, or I'm just concerned about how it sounds in the track. And so finding pedals, I kind of try a lot of stuff, and then the stuff that sticks is the stuff that gives me some flexibility, but lets me kind of think the same way I would with a synthesizer or outboard gear, without losing the sort of feeling of playing bass, the visceral aspect, not losing that rock kind of tangible feeling. Yeah, I think so. I think with bass in a live situation, you're not, because you're dealing with such a wide frequency range when you're talking about bass with effects, it's very easy to lose the detail in a sound or to lose the sort of mid-range articulation because of the amount of low end in the room, or the amount of, a resonance in the room or boominess, and then all of a sudden you can't hear the subtlety of the, top end of a bit crusher or the way the distortion reacts. And so, a lot of times I'll find a pedal that I think is cool and I'll try it out on a gig and it just disappears, and so the pedals, finding pedals that work and always sound good in different rooms, I think that's a really important part when it comes to effects on bass, because it's not as forgiving as guitar. Things that are only a mid-range and treble sound, it kind of always cuts through and you can really focus on just that part of the frequency range. But with bass, with effect, you kind of have to make sure that you're not messing up the low end, you're not losing the sub information, but you still have enough punch and clarity in the mid-range and treble. So like that's super tough, I think, especially with overdrives and modulation type effects, to sort of not lose any of that full range and not lose the clarity. For me, I'd say 80% of the time the sound is something that is there from the beginning of the compositional idea, or it's a big part of it. It's not really separate and something that's just slapped on after, because the way the instrument responds changes so much based on what effects you're using, that it kind of really inspires the performance and inspires what works parts wise. That's also kind of like a philosophy that I stick to in pretty much all aspects of music, like in production. Like I don't like to leave all the options open till the end. If there's a chance to print compression on a room mic or print a delay on a vocal. Like I much prefer to just do it, because then it informs everything else, you know. So the composition is the sound in modern music. A lot of times it's like one sound can be the whole song, you know. So committing to that as early as possible, I feel like is kind of the only way to do it, for me at least. I mean, there are times where you have an idea that works, and then you kind of keep messing around to be like, okay, well, it's not quite the right sound, I need to keep searching. But a lot of times the you know, you pick up a guitar with a certain pedal and you play a riff, it's like it sounds exactly a certain way and leads you to the next decision. You know, each sort of sonic move informs the next one, and I think that's an important stage of the process for me. It's like committing each time. Yeah, I mean, it was fun to, you know, I enjoy teaching this stuff because I feel like the way that I approach it is, like I kind of said, it's coming more out of like a modular synthesizer and production aspect. So it's like I kind of look at it as a way to show people like a different way to think about how sounds are put together. You know, like the typical mentality of how a lot of people think of sounds is like, okay, I've got my bass sound. Now I'm going to just add some chorus. Now it sounds like chorus with bass. Maybe I'll add some distortion. Now it sounds like bass with some distortion and chorus. As opposed to, okay, here's my bass. Now with the octave pedal, I can turn it into like a square wave oscillator or a triangle wave oscillator. Then I can, you know, use a fuzz to turn it into a square wave. Then I can filter it. Then I can use a chorus pedal to make it sound like there's two other oscillators that are detuned with an LFO. You know, there's like just these different way of thinking about how you make sounds, and so that was really fun to teach. You know, just because a lot of people haven't played with analog synthesizers and thought about that kind of stuff. You know, and the other thing was even compositionally thinking about you know, how to write a bass line, how songs work. You know, knowing how to make electronic music is a very different process than writing a song with a band, you know. And so thinking of how a sequencer works, playing a bass line that's a loop where occasionally, you know, you drop out 3 notes or you repeat the first measure and a half as a hemiola, you know, like things that are the concept is what a producer would do, not what a musician would do when they're jamming. And I think that those kind of thinking at problems from different angles is kind of, it leads you to an interesting solution. And so that was kind of fun to like teach people, show people kind of how I had figured out to think about it, to put the two worlds together. You know, it's like and it was fun because I taught drummers as well as bass players, and you know, because it's not really instrument specific technical stuff. You know, it's not very hard to play a lot of the stuff. It's more about the concept and how the sound and the notes, you know, create a feeling. And so teaching people sort of how that works was a lot of fun. Yeah, so I first you know, got introduced to jam on tour. You guys came out to a Nerve show and we hung out and you showed me a bunch of things, which was totally rad. And you know, I was struck right away by how much like the pedals were designed really like for a playing perspective. You know, there weren't unnecessary features, there weren't things that wouldn't be useful in a live setting. So, you know, I checked out a bunch of stuff and immediately there were like inspiring sounds, and I think I threw a couple on the ground next to my pedal board that night just to try them out because I was, you know, super psyched about them. And a couple of them have found their way into really regular use in my setup. The chorus pedal is a fixture on my pedal board, and I use that for everything from, you know, pitch vibrato kind of detuned stuff to thickening up synth sounds for like re-space kind of things, or really saturated wide sounds, which is nice because a lot of times bass choruses can be too subtle, and this one has, you know, the ability to go from like a nice subtle shimmer, which is nice for some music, but for what I do, I kind of need something a lot more aggressive and creative, and I can kind of go take it to these places that really stretch the sound a lot and give me like a thick, detuned oscillator kind of vibe. So that one has been a really big part of my sound for the last couple years, and then the overdrives and the tremolo have been really great in the studio just because they're super flexible. So if I need, you know, whether I'm working on my records or producing other bands or mixing stuff, there's like, you know I can always grab it, get a super cool sound right away, you know, and people have a lot of fun playing them in the studio. They're kind of, you know, they're pedals, especially like the tremolo, they're pedals you can really play, you know, being able to switch between the two rates. You know, it's not just a static effect, which is it's really nice. Like to have a pedal be playable, not just a static sound, is a pretty huge part of what I like to do with all that kind of stuff. So yeah, like pretty much every sound that I've found has been useful or found its way into my workflow in some way.